Hi, in this tutorial, Tutorial 5, Section 6, Part 1, I will be creating a program utilizing a tab control. The tab control is a subcontainer which is used to contain other GUI controls. It displays an individual tab chosen by the user one tab at a time, and only those controls that are on the active tab are visible to the user. This is very useful in organizing and subdividing various program elements and functionality. After placing a tab control within the program, I will be adding several visual control objects to the various tabs within the tab control. As I add the visual control elements, I will be explaining some fundamental characteristics of those controls. And while the program is being created, I will demonstrate how to implement those controls. In Part 1, I will be demonstrating radio buttons and checkboxes, the slider control, and TextArea Controls. First, start GAMBAS. Create a new project and choose Graphical Application. Place it in your Programs directory and name it Tab Program Experiment 1. Once the project is in the IDE, open the main form and click on the Containers tab in the toolbox. Select the Tab Panel element and draw the control within the form. GAMBAS should name the first tab control Tab Panel 1. You can resize the form and the tab control to give yourself a little more room to work. With the tab control selected, move to the Count property in the Properties pane and set the value to 6. This will set the tab control to have 6 tabs. Then click on the tab control and make sure that the current tab, the tab that is active, is tab 1. Do this by clicking on the first tab. Set the text property in the Properties pane for the first tab to the word Choices. This is where we are going to place radio buttons and checkboxes. Click on the second tab in the tab control. Set the text property in the Properties pane for the second tab to the word Slider. Next, click on the third tab and set the text property for the third tab to the word Text. This is where we are going to place a text box. Click on the fourth tab and set the text property for the fourth tab to the word Buttons. This is where we are going to create a numeric keypad made with 10 button controls. Next, click on the fifth tab and set the text property to the words Drop Down. And finally, click on the 6th tab and set the text property to the word Picture. Go ahead and save the project and run the program in the IDE at this point. You will see that the program consists of a basic form with a tab control with 6 tabs that you can select while the program is running. Go ahead and exit the program. Now we are going to start placing some visual controls within the tab container. And at this point, I would like to offer another programming tip based upon my experience. You should always begin by double-checking which control, container, or program element is actively selected in the project each time you are working on it. It is very easy to focus on the program element that you are working on and then attempt to add or change something only to discover that you are actually modifying the wrong element of the program. This is very easy to do, so a really good programming habit to adopt is to always click on your target program element before you actually begin modifying it or working on it. This can dramatically reduce frustrations and rework while programming. This is especially relevant now that we will be copying and pasting within a subcontainer inside of another container object. Now, to start placing and using some of the various visual controls from the standard toolbox, we will start with radio buttons and checkboxes. Radio buttons allow a user to select options or individual elements from a group of choices. The primary characteristic of radio buttons is that they only allow a single option to be chosen at a time. Radio buttons are therefore used for making exclusive choices. In other words, selecting a different option deselects any other radio button that may have been selected. Note, this only applies to radio buttons within a single container. Groups of radio buttons within different container objects do not affect each other. Checkboxes, on the other hand, allow a user to select multiple options simultaneously. So each checkbox is entirely independent of other checkboxes, and each individual checkbox can be checked or unchecked regardless of the state of any other checkbox. To place radio buttons within the Choices tab, first click on the Tab control and Tab 1, the Choices tab. Then in the Toolbox's Form tab, click on the Radio button control. To place radio buttons on the first tab, draw the first radio button within the Choices tab. Here's another helpful suggestion. In order to make it easier later to set all of the descriptive names on the radio buttons, go ahead and set the text property of the first radio button before copying it. Change the text property to radio button space choice space #, so that later all that will have to be changed in the IDE at design time will be to click on the text property for each radio button and add a number at the end of the existing text. This will give the radio buttons unique descriptive visual names while the program is running. Copying the first radio button with the common text element of the description already in place will minimize the future work and typing needed to enter the runtime captions. Now that the first radio button is set up, copy the radio button control and after making sure to click on the correct tab control, paste 5 more copies on the Choices tab and arrange them in a vertical stack. Next, paste 2 additional radio buttons on the F main form outside of the Choices tab. Then move these to the bottom of the form. These will function separately from the radio buttons within the tab container. Finally, click on each radio button and click on the text property, which now already contains the desired general text, and press the N key on the keyboard to move to the end of the caption and simply type the numbers 1 to 8 to match the actual radio button identities. Now to add checkboxes. Again, click on the tab control and make sure tab 1, the Choices tab, is selected. Click on the checkbox control in the toolbox and create a checkbox within the tab control on the Choices tab. Again, to make setting the runtime descriptions easier, change the text property of the first checkbox to checkbox space choice space # before copying the first checkbox control. Then also paste the first checkbox 5 more times onto tab 1. Again, make sure to click on the tab control and the correct tab prior to using Ctrl V to paste the additional copies of the checkboxes within the intended container. Then also arrange the checkboxes in a vertical stack beside the radio buttons. Next, click on each checkbox and change the text property to correspond to the actual checkbox identity number. Next, be sure the tab control is selected and draw 2 label controls on tab 1. Place the first label over the group of radio buttons and the second label over the stack of checkboxes. Set the text property of the first label over the radio buttons to exclusive choices and set the text property of the second label over the checkboxes to inclusive choices. Then select both labels and make them bold and increase their font size by clicking the Bold and Increase Font Size Quick buttons on the editing toolbar. Now that all of the program elements are in place on tab 1, this is a good time to generally finalize the locations for the best visual appearance. Remember, multiple program objects can be selected and moved as blocks, which makes arranging them easier. So select all of the controls on tab 1 and drag them to the most effectively centered locations. At this point, save the project and run it to test it out. Now I will be adding a slider control to the program. Slider controls allow a user to set a numerical value by using a mouse to drag what is called the handle of the graphical slider and move the slider back and forth to change the value. The primary characteristic of slider controls are that they have a range, a minimum value and a maximum value, which is set at design time. This control allows a user to easily graphically manipulate a quantity or value within that range while the program is running. To place a slider control within the slider tab, first click on the tab control, then tab 2, the slider tab, to make sure that the control will be placed in the proper location. Then in the Toolbox's Form tab, click on the slider control and draw the slider control on the tab. With slider 1 selected, in the Properties pane, verify the max value is 100 and the min value is 0. And check that the value property is 0. This represents the control's starting value when the program launches. Also, add a label control from the toolbox. Create the label under the slider control. GAMBAS should name it Label 3, since it is the third label placed within the program. With Label 3 selected, set the text property of the label to 0. Also, increase the font size and make the label bold by clicking the Increase Font Size and Bold Quick buttons on the editing toolbar. Next, change Label 3's alignment property to center. This will keep the displayed number centered within the label regardless of what digits are displayed. Lastly, go ahead and select both controls and center them in the tab. Now I am going to add a single line of code to the slider control to display the current value of the slider using the label. Here I am setting Label 3's text property equal to the current value of slider 1 whenever that value is changed by a user. To do this, double-click on the slider control. And in the code block which starts with public sub slider 1 change, enter the code label3.text equals slider1.value. GAMBAS will automatically handle the conversion from the number value of the slider control into a text string for the label. Save the project and run it to test the slider tab. When the slider is dragged to its minimum value, the label should read 0. And when the slider is dragged to its maximum value, the label will read 100. Remember, the slider's range, its starting and ending points, as well as its initial value can be set to whatever values are needed. In future projects, for example, I will be setting a range from 0 to 255 to effectively match the numerical requirements of functions built into the GAMBAS language. Now to add a TextArea control to the program. The primary use of TextArea controls is to allow a user to enter and manipulate blocks of text. This control provides full text editing capability within a program, without the programmer needing to recreate all of the functionality required by a fully functional text editor. This is a great time and work-saving control. The TextArea control is a very powerful control, allowing all of the standard editing actions, including highlighting, copying, cutting, and pasting. The control will even generate functional horizontal and vertical scroll bars if the text entered into it exceeds the on-screen visual limits of the text area. To place a TextArea control within the Text tab, click on the tab container and then tab 3, the Text tab. Again, this is to make sure that the control won't inadvertently be placed in the wrong location. Then in the Toolbox's Form tab, click on the TextArea control and draw the control to occupy a usably large area on tab 3. While the TextArea control contains many properties, in this particular program at this time, I am simply going to use the defaults, but feel free to experiment with the control's properties. Next, also add a label control from the toolbox. Create the label under the TextArea control. If you are following this example, GAMBAS should name this label Label 4. Finally, with the label under the TextArea selected, set the text property of the label to the words Enter Text Above. Again, increase the font size of the label and make the label bold by clicking the Increase Font Size and Bold Quick buttons on the editing toolbar. This is purely aesthetic, and the purpose of the label on this tab is simply to indicate the general purpose of the tab to a user. Now go ahead and save the project, and again, run it to test it out. In the next tutorial, Tutorial 5, Section 6, Part 2, I will be populating the Buttons tab and demonstrating the program code necessary to create a numeric keypad for number entry. Again, thanks for taking a look at these videos and joining me as I explore the GAMBAS language and making these videos. I hope you find them useful.